The grand hall of Valoria Prime shimmered beneath thousands of floating crystal lights. Their glow danced across walls carved from living crystal, turning the vast chamber into something that looked less like a palace and more like a dream. At the center of that dream stood Princess Zara. Her golden gown flowed around her like liquid sunlight, and from a distance, she appeared every bit the perfect royal daughter of legend. But anyone who looked closely could see the silver streaks woven through her golden hair. The mark. The curse. The reason she was slowly dying. For 3 long hours, the greatest nobles of the Valorian Empire had approached the throne one by one. Each bowed respectfully. Each praised her beauty, intelligence, and kindness. And each politely refused to bond with her. Their words were different. Their reasons were different. But the meaning was always the same. No one wanted the cursed princess. Zara stood motionless through every rejection. Years of royal training kept her expression calm and graceful. A princess never cried in public. A princess never showed weakness. But inside, every refusal felt like another blade sliding into her heart. She was 26 years old, and she was dying. Neural crystallization syndrome. The disease was slowly turning parts of her nervous system into crystal. The physicians had already given their verdict. Without a compatible bondmate, she had less than 3 years to live. Maybe less. The bond could save her. But nobody was willing to take the risk. Not because of science. Not because of medicine. Because of fear. Ancient stories claimed that anyone bonded to someone bearing silver marks would suffer tragedy and death. Most educated people knew the superstition made no sense. Yet no one was willing to test it. Not when their own lives were involved. On the throne above, Emperor Korin watched silently. To the crowd, he looked as powerful as ever. A ruler whose fleets controlled entire star systems. A king whose command could shake worlds. But Zara knew her father better than anyone. She saw the pain hidden behind his eyes, the helplessness, the heartbreak. Because for all his power, he could not save his daughter. High Counselor Draven stood nearby, pretending sympathy. Zara knew better. Draven wanted this. Her death would solve many problems for people like him. People who hated her vision of a united galaxy. People who feared cooperation with other species. People who preferred old prejudices to new possibilities. Then came the final candidate, Lord Vexen. The most respected noble in the Empire. A man known for wisdom and courage. As he approached, hope stirred inside Zara despite herself. Maybe this time, maybe someone would finally choose her. Vexen bowed deeply before the Emperor. Then he turned toward Zara. His eyes were filled with genuine sorrow. That made it worse. Far worse. Because she knew the answer before he spoke. "Princess Zara," he said softly, "you are one of the finest souls I have ever known. It would be an honor beyond measure to stand beside you." For one brief moment, her heart leaped. Then came the rest. "But I have responsibilities to my house, to my family, and I cannot ignore the dangers that have been warned of for generations." The words echoed through the hall, each one heavier than the last. "I am sorry." Silence followed. Absolute silence. Something inside Zara shattered. The final hope she had carried for years simply vanished. If even Lord Vexen would not stand beside her, then no one would. She would die exactly as she stood now. Alone, rejected, forgotten. Slowly, Emperor Korin rose from his throne. The entire hall froze. When the Emperor stood, worlds listened. His voice thundered across the chamber. "If no Valorian noble possesses the courage to save my daughter," his gaze swept across the crowd, "then I shall seek courage elsewhere." Murmurs spread instantly. Confusion. Shock. Fear. Korin raised his hand. The room fell silent again. From this moment forward, the opportunity to bond with Princess Zara is extended to every member species of the Galactic Coalition. The hall exploded. Nobles leapt to their feet. Voices shouted protests. Outrage echoed from every corner. A royal princess bonded to an outsider? To another species? It was unthinkable. Scandalous. Historic. Yet the Emperor's expression never changed. His decision was final. His law was absolute. Representatives from dozens of civilizations sat in stunned silence. Some exchanged nervous glances. Others looked away entirely. Not one stepped forward. Not one. Minutes passed. Then the assembly ended, still without a single volunteer. Later that night, Zara stood alone on the balcony of her private chambers. Below her stretched the endless lights of Valoria Prime. Millions of lives, millions of dreams, millions of people she would never truly know. The wind carried the distant sounds of the city toward her. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. Not because she was afraid of dying, but because she finally understood something terrible. People did not see her. They saw the silver streaks. They saw the curse. They saw the stories. No one saw Zara. No one wanted Zara. Far beyond Valoria Prime, light years away, a small human diplomatic vessel drifted through hyperspace. Inside, a man named Jake Morrison sat alone in his quarters. A report glowed on the screen before him. Princess Zara, neural crystallization syndrome. No volunteers. Estimated survival, less than 3 years. Jake read the report once, then again, then a third time. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a slow frown forming on his face. Not a frown of fear, not a frown of uncertainty. A frown of disbelief. Because where the rest of the galaxy saw a curse, Jake saw something else entirely. An injustice. And Jake Morrison had never been very good at ignoring those. She did not know about the kind of man who would hold a defensive position for 6 hours while his entire squad died around him. She did not know about the kind of person who believed that doing the right thing mattered more than politics or safety or common sense. Within 12 hours, her message would reach Jake. And 12 hours after that, everything would change. Jake Morrison sat in his quarters aboard the diplomatic escort ship Horizon and read the message for the 5th time. The information was straightforward enough. An alien princess was dying because no one would bond with her due to an ancient superstition. She had maybe 3 years left to live. The bonding process would cure her completely, but it required someone willing to undergo a permanent neural link with her. No one had volunteered. Jake was 32 years old and had seen more death than most people twice his age. He had been a Marine during the border wars, had watched his entire squad die while he somehow survived. He still remembered their faces, their voices, the way they looked at him in those final moments. He had spent 5 years trying to understand why he lived when they did not. His therapist said it was survivor's guilt. Jake just called it reality. After the war, he took a position commanding a small diplomatic escort ship. It was supposed to be peaceful, a way to heal and move on. But the politics of the Galactic Coalition frustrated him more than combat ever had. Everyone was so concerned with maintaining status and following protocols that they forgot about actually helping people. Humanity was the newest member species, which meant they got treated like children who did not understand how things worked. Jake understood perfectly. He just did not like what he saw. He started researching Princess Zara. The official records were full of diplomatic language and formal achievements, but Jake dug deeper. He found her published papers on xenobiology. She had spent years studying how different species could share medical knowledge and treatments. She had established free clinics in the outer territories, where species that normally could not afford proper healthcare could get treatment. She had argued passionately for more cooperation between coalition members. Jake found interviews where she talked about her dreams of a galaxy where genetic diseases could be cured, regardless of what species you belong to. He found records of her volunteer work, her research grants, her advocacy. This was not some spoiled princess sitting in a palace. This was someone who actually cared about making things better, and she was going to die because people believed in a stupid superstition. Jake thought about his squad. They had died protecting people they never met, fighting for a cause they believed in. He thought about the last words his squad leader had said before the end. "Do something that matters, Morrison. Make it count." Jake had been trying to figure out what that meant for 5 years. Maybe this was it. He composed a formal message stating his intention to volunteer as a bonding candidate for Princess Zara. He kept it simple and direct. He met the basic biological requirements for compatibility. He understood the commitment involved. He was willing to undergo the necessary procedures and trials. He sent it through official channels before he could talk himself out of it. The response was immediate and chaotic. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Kyle Stevens, burst into his quarters within minutes. The man looked like he had seen a ghost. He demanded to know if Jake had actually submitted his name to bond with the Valoran princess. When Jake confirmed it, Stevens started listing all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The political complications, the cultural differences, the fact that humans were barely respected in the coalition as it was. This would make Earth look desperate, or opportunistic, or both. Jake listened patiently, and then told Stevens that he did not care about the politics. A person was dying. He could help. That was all that mattered. Stevens looked at him like he was crazy, but eventually left, shaking his head. Ambassador Chen contacted him next. She was more diplomatic than Stevens, but her message was essentially the same. This was not a good idea. The Valorans would see it as an insult. Earth would face diplomatic fallout. Jake should withdraw his candidacy immediately. Jake politely declined. Chen argued for 20 minutes before finally giving up. The message reached Valoria Prime within hours. The reaction there was even more extreme. The idea of a human bonding with Valoran royalty was scandalous beyond measure. Humans were barely more than primitives in Valoran eyes. They had only been in space for a few hundred years. Their technology was crude, their understanding of the galaxy was limited, and now, one of them wanted to bond with a princess. It was unthinkable. But Emperor Korin had made a decree. Any species could submit candidates. He could not refuse to consider Jake's application without breaking his own law. The Emperor was trapped by his own words, and everyone knew it. Princess Zara heard about the human volunteer during dinner with her father. She immediately demanded to know everything about this Captain Morrison. When she learned he was human, she felt anger rise in her chest like fire. This had to be some kind of political game. Either Earth was trying to gain leverage in the coalition, or this human was trying to make a name for himself. No one would actually volunteer to bond with her out of genuine concern. That was impossible. She told her father she wanted to meet this human immediately. She would reject him to his face and end this embarrassing situation before it went any further. The Emperor tried to convince her to wait, to handle it through proper diplomatic channels. But Zara insisted if she was going to die, she would at least maintain control over how it happened. Jake received the summons to meet Princess Zara the next morning. He put on his dress uniform, the one with all his medals and commendations, not because he wanted to show off, but because he wanted her to see that he took this seriously. He arrived at the palace in a small shuttle and was escorted through halls that made him feel like an insect. Everything was huge and grand, and designed to make visitors feel small. He was brought to a private receiving room, where Princess Zara waited. Jake had seen pictures of her, but they did not do her justice. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost impossible. Her golden dress matched her hair, and those silver streaks caught the light like threads of moonlight. But what struck Jake most was her eyes. They were angry and hurt and defensive all at once. Zara looked at the human and felt her anger intensify. He was shorter than most Valorians, built more compact and dense. His left arm was clearly artificial, some kind of cybernetic replacement. His face was scarred and weathered, in a way that spoke of a hard life. He looked like a soldier, not a diplomat, and he was staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. She demanded to know why he had volunteered. What did Earth hope to gain from this? What political advantage was he seeking? Jake listened to her accusations calmly. When she finally stopped to take a breath, he told her the truth. He had read her research. He respected what she had accomplished. He did not believe in curses or superstitions. If she would have him, he would bond with her, not for politics or advancement, but because letting a good person die for stupid reasons was wrong. Zara stared at him. No one had called her a good person in months. Everyone saw her as a cursed princess, or a political problem, or a tragic figure. This human was looking at her like she was just a person who needed help. It was so unexpected that she did not know how to respond. Jake told her he understood if she wanted to reject him. He was human, which meant most Valorans would see this as inappropriate, but he wanted her to know that his offer was genuine. If she decided to accept, he would stand by her through whatever came next. He had survived impossible situations before. He could survive this too. Then he bowed in the formal Valorant style and waited for her decision. Zara did not reject Jake immediately, which surprised everyone, including herself. She told him she needed time to think about his offer. Jake simply nodded and left without argument. That night, Zara could not sleep. She kept thinking about the way the human had looked at her, not with pity or calculation, but with simple respect. It had been so long since anyone treated her that way. 3 days later, she sent word that she would accept his candidacy. But High Counselor Draven immediately invoked an ancient law. Any outsider who wished to bond with Valoran royalty must first prove themselves worthy through the 3 trials. The trials of wisdom, strength, and honor had not been used in centuries, but they were still technically valid. Draven smiled as he explained this to the court. The trials were designed to be nearly impossible for non-Valorans. This human would fail, and the embarrassing situation would end. Jake learned about the trials from Ambassador Chen, who looked even more worried than before. She explained that no outsider had ever passed all 3 trials. Most failed the first one. Jake asked what the trials involved. Chen told him everything she knew, which was not much. The trials were ancient and deliberately vague. They adapted to each candidate. Jake thought about it for approximately 10 seconds, and then said he would do them anyway. The first trial took place in the Grand Council chamber. Jake stood before 50 of the most educated Valorans in the Empire. They presented him with an ancient philosophical puzzle that had stumped scholars for hundreds of years. The puzzle involved concepts of time, consciousness, and reality that were deeply rooted in Valorian culture and metaphysics. Jake listened carefully as they explained the problem. The Valorans expected him to try to understand their philosophical framework and work within it. That was what every previous candidate had attempted. But Jake was not a philosopher. He was a soldier and a practical thinker. He looked at the puzzle not as a metaphysical question, but as a mathematical problem. He started writing equations on the display screen they had provided. He used game theory and probability calculations. He approached the ancient puzzle like it was a tactical scenario. The Valorant scholars watched in confusion as Jake filled the screen with human mathematics. When he finished, he presented a solution that was technically correct, but completely outside traditional Valorant thinking. He had solved their impossible puzzle by refusing to accept their basic assumptions. The council was divided. Some argued that his solution was invalid because it did not engage with Valorant philosophy. Others admitted that the puzzle had asked for a solution, and Jake had provided one that was logically sound. After 3 hours of debate, the council declared that Jake had passed the trial of wisdom. Technically, barely, but a pass was a pass. Draven looked furious. Zara, watching from a private gallery, found herself smiling. The human had not tried to become Valoran. He had solved the problem as a human, using human methods. There was something admirable about that. The second trial came 1 week later. Jake had to face Lord Catherine in ritual combat. Catherine was the greatest warrior in the Valorian military, a man who stood nearly 7 feet tall and had never lost a fight. The combat would take place in the traditional arena, with thousands of Valorans watching. Catherine was supposed to defeat Jake quickly and decisively, proving that humans were physically inferior. Jake walked into the arena knowing he could not win through strength. Catherine outweighed him by at least 80 pounds of pure muscle. Valorans were naturally stronger than humans. In a straight fight, Jake would lose badly, so he decided not to fight straight. The fight began, and Catherine came at him like a charging bull. Jake dodged and moved, using his smaller size and lower center of gravity to stay out of reach. Catherine was fast for his size, but Jake had been trained in combat by the best Marines in the human fleet. He knew how to read an opponent, how to exploit weaknesses, how to turn strength into a disadvantage. Jake let Catherine chase him around the arena, waiting for the big Valoran to get frustrated. When Catherine finally overcommitted to an attack, Jake used his cybernetic arm to deflect the blow and counter with a strike to Catherine's knee. The Valoran stumbled, but recovered quickly. The crowd was shocked. No one had ever made Catherine stumble before. The fight continued for 20 brutal minutes. Jake took hits that would have killed a normal human. His ribs cracked, his nose broke, blood ran down his face, and made the arena floor slippery. But he kept moving, kept fighting, kept refusing to give up. He used every dirty trick he had learned in the war. Eye strikes, joint locks, pressure points. Nothing was off limits in ritual combat. Finally, Jake saw his opening. Catherine threw a massive punch that Jake barely dodged, But the momentum carried Catherine forward, and Jake was there, his cybernetic arm wrapping around the Valoran's throat in a chokehold. He locked his legs around Catherine's waist and squeezed. The big warrior tried to throw him off, but Jake held on like his life depended on it, because it did. Catherine could have continued fighting. He was strong enough to break Jake's hold eventually, but he was a warrior, and warriors recognized courage when they saw it. This human had taken everything Catherine could dish out and still kept fighting. That deserved respect. Catherine tapped Jake's arm 3 times, the traditional signal of submission. The crowd went silent. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. A human had defeated Lord Catherine. Jake released the hold and collapsed on the arena floor, barely conscious. Catherine stood up and looked down at him. Then he did something unprecedented. He offered Jake his hand and helped him to his feet. In front of thousands of witnesses, Catherine declared that Jake had proven himself worthy. Any being who could fight like that had earned the right to be called a warrior. Jake spent the next 3 days in medical treatment. His injuries were severe, but not life-threatening. Zara visited him once while he was unconscious. She looked at his battered face and felt something shift inside her. This human had nearly died just for the chance to help her. She did not understand it, but she could not deny it either. The 3rd trial was the worst. Jake had to enter the Palace of Mirrors, a place designed to break a person's spirit through psychological torture. The palace read your mind and created illusions based on your deepest fears and regrets. Most candidates lasted less than a day before begging to be released. Jake entered the palace alone, the doors sealed behind him. For 3 days, he faced illusions of his dead squad. They accused him of abandoning them, of surviving when they died. He saw visions of Princess Zara dying because he was not good enough to save her. He experienced scenarios where his failure caused wars and suffering across the galaxy. The palace took everything he feared and made it real. But Jake had been living with these fears for 5 years. He knew them intimately. He did not try to fight the illusions or deny his guilt. Instead, he accepted it. Yes, he survived when his squad died. Yes, he carried that weight every day. But he was still here, and he could still try to do something good. The palace could show him his failures, but it could not stop him from trying again. On the 3rd day, the palace doors opened. Jake walked out exhausted and haunted, but still standing. He had passed all 3 trials. Draven had failed to stop him, and now nothing stood between Jake Morrison and bonding with Princess Zara, except her own decision. Zara found Jake in the medical bay 2 days after he emerged from the Palace of Mirrors. He was sitting up in bed, staring at nothing, with eyes that had seen too much. She had watched all 3 trials from hidden galleries. She had seen him solve an impossible puzzle with human mathematics. She had watched him fight a warrior twice his size and refused to quit. She had waited outside the Palace of Mirrors for 3 days, afraid he would not come out. Jake looked up when she entered. His face was still bruised from the fight with Catherine. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. But he smiled when he saw her, a small, genuine smile that made her heart do something strange in her chest. She sat down in the chair beside his bed, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Zara asked him why he did it. Why endure all that pain and fear just for a stranger? Jake thought about the question carefully before answering. He told her about his squad, about watching them die while he survived. He told her about 5 years of trying to figure out what it meant to keep living when others had not gotten that chance. He said that maybe the answer was this. Maybe the point of surviving was to help someone else survive. Zara listened and felt tears forming in her eyes. No one had ever done something like this for her. Not because she was a princess, not because of politics or duty, but because this human thought she deserved to live. She reached out and took his hand, the real one, not the cybernetic one. She told him that if he was still willing, she would accept the bonding. Jake squeezed her hand gently. He told her he was still willing. He would always be willing. They sat together in the medical bay, holding hands while the stars turned outside the window. And for the first time in months, Zara felt something like hope. The official announcement of the upcoming bonding ceremony sent shockwaves through Valoran society. Many nobles were outraged. Conservative factions called it a disgrace to tradition, but others pointed out that Jake had passed all 3 trials fairly. He had proven himself according to ancient law. Like it or not, the bonding would proceed. Over the next few weeks, Jake and Zara spent increasing amounts of time together. The bonding ceremony was complex and required both participants to undergo preparations, but beyond the formal requirements, they genuinely wanted to know each other. They started with awkward formal conversations and gradually relaxed into real friendship. Jake told her about Earth. He described rain and how it smelled like clean metal. He talked about forests where trees grew so thick you could not see the sky. He explained human music and art and all the strange little customs that made no sense to anyone who was not human. Zara found herself fascinated by these stories. Humans were such young species, barely in space for a few centuries, but they had such passion for everything. Sarah shared her own stories. She told Jake about her research, about the genetic diseases she wanted to cure, about her dreams of a galaxy where species helped each other, instead of staying isolated. She showed him her laboratory and explained her work in terms simple enough for a non-scientist to understand. Jake listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was really paying attention. They discovered unexpected common ground. Both valued loyalty above all else. Both believed that doing the right thing mattered more than following rules. Both had felt the weight of expectations they never asked for. Jake was supposed to be the hero who survived when his squad did not. Zara was supposed to be the perfect princess who never showed weakness. They understood each other in ways neither had expected. One evening, they were walking through the palace gardens when Zara suddenly laughed. Jake asked what was funny. She explained that she had spent months preparing to die alone, and now she was walking through gardens with a human who had passed impossible trials just to help her. The whole situation was absurd. Jake agreed that it was pretty ridiculous. Then they both started laughing. Real, genuine laughter that echoed through the garden. But not everyone was happy about the developing relationship. High Counselor Draven watched Jake and Zara growing closer, and his anger grew. This was not how things were supposed to go. The human was supposed to fail the trials. If that did not work, Draven had expected Zara to reject him anyway. But instead, they were actually bonding emotionally. It was disgusting and wrong, and completely unacceptable. Draven began meeting with other conservative nobles in secret. They formed a coalition of people who believed that Valoran purity must be maintained at all costs. They started spreading new rumors. Jake was using human technology to manipulate Zara's emotions. The bonding would corrupt the royal bloodline. If this was allowed to happen, it would destroy the empire from within. The first assassination attempt happened 3 weeks before the scheduled bonding ceremony. Jake was returning to his quarters late one night when someone fired an energy weapon at him from the shadows. His combat instincts saved him. He dove behind a pillar, and his cybernetic arm automatically deployed defensive shields. The assassin fired 3 more shots and then fled. When palace guards responded to the disturbance, the investigation went nowhere. The assassin had used untraceable weapons and left no evidence. But the message was clear. There were people who wanted Jake dead. People who would rather see Zara die than let her bond with a human. Jake reported the incident, but refused to increase his security. He told Zara he had survived worse things in the war. A few scared nobles with energy weapons were not going to stop him now. Zara was terrified. She begged Jake to take the threat seriously. He could still leave. No one would blame him for backing out after an assassination attempt. But Jake refused. He had made a commitment. He would see it through. Besides, he said with a slight smile, dying for a good cause was better than living with regrets. That night, Zara could not sleep. She kept thinking about Jake being killed because of her. She had been prepared to die alone. She had made peace with that fate. But the idea of Jake dying because he tried to help her was unbearable. She realized with sudden clarity that this was no longer just about curing her disease. She cared about this human. Really cared. His life mattered to her as much as her own. The next morning, she went to Jake's quarters early. She told him that she cared about what happened to him. If he died trying to save her, it would not be saving her at all. It would destroy her. Jake looked surprised by the intensity in her voice. Then he smiled and told her he did not plan on dying. He had survived impossible odds before. He would do it again. But this time, he would have something worth surviving for. They stood close together in his quarters as morning light streamed through the windows. Zara reached up and touched his face gently, careful of the fading bruises. Jake covered her hand with his. They did not kiss. That would come later. But in that moment, something shifted between them. They were no longer strangers fulfilling an obligation. They were two people who had chosen each other, who would face whatever came next together. And for both of them, that made all the difference. The bonding ceremony was scheduled for dawn following ancient Valoran tradition. The ceremony would take place in the Temple of Stars, a building carved from a single massive crystal that caught and reflected the light of Valoria's 3 suns. Thousands of nobles and dignitaries had been invited. Most came out of curiosity rather than support. They wanted to witness this unprecedented event, this strange union between a dying princess and a human warrior. Jake stood in his preparation chamber, wearing formal Valoran robes that felt completely wrong on him. He was used to uniforms and practical clothing. These flowing garments made him feel like he was playing dress-up, but he wore them anyway, because this was important to Zara. Ambassador Chen had come to see him before the ceremony. She wished him luck and told him that whatever happened, Earth was proud of him. Jake appreciated the sentiment, but he was not doing this for Earth. He was doing it for Zara. In her own chamber, Zara was being prepared by attendants who had served her family for generations. They dressed her in white robes that symbolized new beginnings. They wove flowers from 3 different worlds into her hair, covering the silver streaks that had caused so much trouble. Zara looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. She looked like a proper Valoran bride, but inside she felt like the same scared woman who had stood before the assembly months ago and been rejected by everyone. Except this time was different. This time, someone had chosen her. Someone had looked past the superstitions and the politics and decided she was worth fighting for. That thought gave her strength as she walked toward the temple. The Temple of Stars was filled with witnesses. Thousands of eyes watched as Zara and Jake approached the central platform where the bonding would take place. The high priest began chanting in ancient Valoran, words that had been used for bonding ceremonies for 10,000 years. Jake did not understand most of it, but he understood the important part. They were about to create a permanent neural link between their minds. It was not just symbolic. It was real and irreversible. The priest brought out the bonding crystal, a device that would facilitate the neural connection. Both Jake and Zara placed their hands on it. The crystal began to glow with inner light. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation spreading from his hand up his arm and into his brain. It did not hurt exactly, but it was deeply uncomfortable, like someone was rearranging his thoughts. Then the real connection began. Jake suddenly felt Zara's presence in his mind. Not her thoughts exactly, but her emotions. He felt her fear and hope and gratitude all mixed together. He felt the loneliness she had carried for months, the terror of facing death, the wonder of finding someone who cared. It was overwhelming and intimate in a way he had never experienced before. Zara felt Jake's presence too. She experienced his memories of war, the weight of survivor's guilt he carried every moment. She felt his determination, his stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. She felt the kindness underneath his soldier's exterior, the gentleness he tried to hide. And she felt something else. He cared about her, really cared. Not because she was a princess, but because she was Zara. The bonding process was supposed to take hours. The neural pathways had to be carefully established to avoid damage to either participant. But something unexpected happened. Jake's neural patterns were different from any Valoran the doctors had ever studied. Human brains had evolved under different conditions, developing unique adaptations. Jake's neural structure was incredibly flexible and resilient, shaped by evolution and enhanced by his cybernetic implants instead of just stabilizing Zara's condition. Jake's neural patterns began actively healing her crystallization. The damaged pathways in her brain started to repair themselves, using Jake's patterns as a template. The medical monitors showed readings that the doctors had never seen before. The neural crystallization syndrome was not just being managed, it was being cured. The high priest noticed the unusual readings and paused the ceremony. Valoran doctors rushed forward to check the equipment. They ran scan after scan, unable to believe what they were seeing. Princess Zara's condition was improving at an impossible rate. The crystallization that had been slowly killing her was breaking down and being replaced by healthy neural tissue. The lead doctor announced to the stunned crowd that the princess would make a complete recovery. Not just survival, complete recovery. The temple erupted in confused conversation. This was not supposed to happen. Bonding could stabilize the condition but never cure it. Yet the readings were undeniable. Something about human neural patterns was uniquely suited to healing Valoran genetic diseases. It was a discovery that would change medicine across the galaxy. But in that moment, All Zara cared about was that she was going to live. Really live. Not just survive for a few more years, but live a full natural lifespan. Jake felt her joy through their connection and could not help but smile. The ceremony continued now with an air of wonder rather than obligation. When the bonding was complete, Jake and Zara stood before the crowd as partners. The high priest declared them bonded in the sight of the stars and the empire. They were now connected for life in ways that went beyond legal or social bonds. They would always feel each other's presence, always know when the other was in danger or distress. It was the most intimate connection two beings could share. But there was something else Jake sensed through the connection. Deep in Zara's genetic memory, passed down through countless generations, was information that had been forgotten by conscious Valoran society. He saw images of ancient Valorans bonding with other species. He saw the silver mark appearing in individuals who had the highest compatibility for cross-species bonding. The mark was not a curse. It never had been. It was a genetic advantage, a trait that indicated someone was especially suited for bonding with non-Alorans. Jake was so shocked by this discovery that he gasped out loud. Zara felt his surprise through their bond and asked what was wrong. Jake told her what he had seen in her genetic memories. The silver mark was not a curse. It was proof that she was genetically perfect for exactly what she needed. Bonding with someone from another species, Zara felt anger flash through her. All those years of rejection and isolation, all that suffering, and it was based on a lie. The curse was fake. Her people had forgotten their own history and turned a gift into a source of shame. Jake squeezed her hand, and she felt his support through their bond. They would fix this. Together, they would uncover the truth and make sure no one else suffered from this stupid superstition. The ceremony ended, and guests came forward to offer congratulations. Most were polite, but distant. A few, like Lord Catherine, seemed genuinely happy for them. Catherine told Jake that he had earned his respect and his friendship. In Valorian warrior culture, that was a bond as strong as family. Jake thanked him and knew he had found an unexpected ally. Emperor Corvin embraced his daughter and welcomed Jake to the royal family. The old emperor looked tired but relieved. His daughter would live. That was all that mattered to him. He told Jake that he owed him a debt that could never be repaid. Jake simply said he was honored to be part of the family. But in the shadows at the back of the temple, High Counselor Draven watched the happy scene with cold fury. This was wrong. All of it. The humans should have failed. The princess should have died. Instead, they were bonded, and she was cured, and everyone was celebrating. Draven decided then that if the system would not stop this abomination, he would have to take matters into his own hands. He had allies and resources, and he had a plan that would end this mockery of tradition once and for all. Jake and Zara spent the days after the bonding ceremony researching the genetic memories he had accessed. They worked in Zara's private laboratory surrounded by holographic displays showing ancient Valoran records. What they discovered was disturbing. The superstition about the silver mark had not appeared naturally. It had been deliberately created. Centuries ago, a faction of conservative nobles had wanted to keep Valoran bloodlines pure. They feared that bonding with other species would dilute what made Valoran special. These nobles had systematically destroyed records of successful cross-species bonding. They had created the curse myth around the silver mark to ensure future generations would avoid such unions. They had rewritten history to make isolation seem like tradition rather than prejudice. Zara felt sick as she read through the hidden records they had uncovered. Her people had been living a lie for hundreds of years. How many others with the silver mark had suffered and died because of this manufactured superstition? How much potential cooperation and growth had been lost because Valorans refused to bond with other species? The scale of the deception was staggering. Jake suggested they take their findings to Emperor Corvin immediately. This was information that needed to be shared with all of Valoria. But as they prepared to leave the laboratory, Zara felt something through their bond. A warning sense that made her freeze. Someone was watching them. Someone who did not want this information revealed. They went to the Emperor anyway, but with increased caution. Corrin listened to their findings with growing anger. He ordered a full investigation into who had hidden these records and why. But the investigation moved slowly. Too slowly. Jake recognized the signs of a cover-up. Someone with influence was blocking their efforts to uncover the truth. The answer came 3 days later, when Lord Catherine requested an urgent private meeting. The big warrior looked uncomfortable as he explained what he had discovered. High Counselor Draven was not working alone. He led a secret organization of conservative nobles who called themselves the Pure Blood Council. This group had been maintaining the Silver Mark superstition for generations. They had power throughout the government and military, and they were planning something big. Catherine had learned about the plan through his military contacts. Draven intended to stage a coup during the public celebration that was scheduled for the following week. The celebration was meant to honor the successful bonding and Zara's recovery. It would draw massive crowds and all the important nobles. Draven planned to use that moment to assassinate the Emperor and all the bonding and seize control of the government. He had support from military commanders and noble houses across the empire. Jake listened to this information with growing concern. A coup of this scale would require extensive planning and resources. Draven must have been preparing for months, maybe years. They had stumbled into something much bigger than they realized. Zara asked Catherine why he was telling them this. He could have stayed neutral or even supported the coup. Catherine looked at her with warrior's eyes and said that he followed honor, not politics. What Draven planned was dishonorable. Therefore, Catherine would oppose it. They brought this information to Emperor Corvin in a secure meeting room. The Emperor called in his most trusted advisors and military commanders. But as the discussion progressed, it became clear that they had a serious problem. Many of the military units were compromised. Guards they thought were loyal had been recruited by Draven's organization. The coup plotters had infiltrated every level of the palace security. If they tried to arrest Draven now, it would trigger the coup immediately, and they were not prepared. Jake studied the situation like the tactical problem it was. They were outnumbered and surrounded by potential enemies. Traditional military responses would not work. But humans had not survived in a hostile galaxy by fighting fair. They survived by being unpredictable and adaptable. He proposed a different approach. Instead of trying to defeat Draven's forces militarily, they would expose the truth about the Silver Mark to all of Valoria. If the people knew they had been lied to for centuries, Draven's support would collapse. Zara immediately understood the plan. They would broadcast the historical evidence they had uncovered. Show the people the truth about ancient Valoran cross-species bonding. Prove that the Silver Mark was a gift rather than a curse. It would destroy the foundation of Draven's ideology. But there was a problem. The broadcasting systems were controlled by government officials, many of whom were loyal to Draven. They could not simply walk into a broadcast center and start transmitting. Ambassador Chin, who had been included in the meeting, offered a solution. Human technology was different from Valoran systems. The humans had portable broadcasting equipment on their ships that could override local communications. If Jake and Zara could get to the human embassy, they could broadcast from there. But the embassy was on the other side of the capital city. Getting there meant traveling through areas that Draven's people controlled. Emperor Corrin did not like the plan. It was too risky. If Jake and Zara were captured or killed, everything would be lost. But Jake pointed out that doing nothing was not an option. Draven would launch his coup whether they acted or not. At least this plan gave them a chance to turn public opinion against the conspirators. Zara supported Jake. She was tired of hiding, tired of letting fear control her life. If they were going to fight, they should fight in a way that actually mattered. The Emperor finally agreed, but only if they had proper protection. Catherine volunteered to lead a small team of warriors he knew were absolutely loyal. Shen said she would have human marines meet them halfway to provide additional security. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. They would move at dawn before Draven expected any action. That night, Jake and Zara could not sleep. They lay together in their chambers, feeling each other's fear and determination through their bond. Zara told Jake that she was scared, not of dying, but of failing. So many people had suffered because of the lies about the Silver Mark. If they failed tomorrow, nothing would change. Jake held her close and promised they would succeed. They had come too far to fail. Now, at the same time, in a secure location across the city, Draven was meeting with his co-conspirators. They reviewed their plans for the coup. Military units were in position. Key officials had been bribed or intimidated. The public celebration would be the perfect moment to strike. The Emperor would be vulnerable, surrounded by crowds where assassins could strike easily. Draven smiled coldly as he imagined the moment. By this time tomorrow, he would control the Empire. The human and his cursed princess would be dead, and Valoria would return to its proper pure state. One of Draven's commanders asked what they should do if the princess and the human tried to flee. Draven's response was simple: kill them on sight. No trials, no public executions. Just eliminate them before they could cause more problems. He had waited too long and planned too carefully to let anything stop him. Now, as dawn approached, both sides prepared for the confrontation that would determine the future of the Valoran Empire. Jake checked his weapons and his cybernetic arms combat systems. Zara gathered the evidence they would need for the broadcast. Catherine assembled his warriors, and Draven positioned his forces throughout the city. The stage was set. Within hours, everything would change one way or another. The only question was who would be left standing when it was over. They left the palace before sunrise, using secret passages that only the royal family knew about. Jake, Zara, Catherine, and 5 of his most trusted warriors moved through the quiet streets toward the human embassy. The city was just beginning to wake up. Vendors were setting up their stalls, and early workers were heading to their jobs. Everything seemed normal, but Jake's combat instincts told him they were being watched. They made it 3 blocks before the attack came. Energy weapons fired from rooftops and windows. Draven's forces had been waiting for them. Catherine shouted orders, and his warriors formed a defensive circle around Jake and Zara. They returned fire while trying to advance toward the embassy, but more enemies kept appearing. This was not just an ambush. This was a full military operation. Jake pulled Zara behind cover as energy blasts scorched the ground where they had been standing. Through their bond, he felt her fear, but also her determination. She was not going to run and hide. She handed him part of their evidence files and told him they needed to split up. If one of them got captured, the other might still make it through. Jake hated the idea, but recognized the tactical sense. He kissed her quickly and told her to stay alive. She promised to do her best. Zara went with 2 of Catherine's warriors toward an alternate route, while Jake and the others pushed forward. The fighting was intense. Jake's cybernetic arm deflected energy blasts and returned fire with built-in weapons. His military training took over, and he moved through the combat zone like he was back in the war. Except this time, he was not fighting to hold a position. He was fighting to reach safety so he could expose the truth. Zara ran through narrow alleyways with her guards. She could feel Jake through their bond, sense his location and his emotions. He was scared, but focused. So was she. They reached a marketplace and tried to blend into the growing crowds. For a few moments, it seemed like they might escape notice. Then someone recognized her. A civilian shouted that the cursed princess was here. Suddenly, dozens of eyes turned toward her, and not all of them were friendly. Back at the palace, Emperor Corrin watched events unfold through surveillance feeds. He saw his daughter running for her life. He saw the human who had saved her fighting against impossible odds. He made a decision. If Draven wanted a coup, he would get a fight. Corrin activated loyal military units and sent them to support Jake and Zara. It was a risk, starting open conflict in the streets. But his daughter was out there, and he would not let her die. Jake's group fought their way to a communications tower. If they could reach the top, they could jury-rig the human broadcasting equipment to work with Valoran systems. But the tower was heavily defended. Draven had anticipated they might try this. Jake looked at the building and calculated their odds. Not good, but not impossible either. He turned to Catherine and said they needed a distraction. The big warrior grinned and said he could provide that. Catherine and 3 warriors charged the main entrance, drawing enemy fire. Jake used the distraction to enter through a side access point. He climbed the stairs as fast as he could, fighting anyone who got in his way. His training and his cybernetic enhancements made him dangerous in close quarters. He reached the broadcast level and started setting up the equipment Chen had provided. He just needed a few minutes. Zara was pinned down in the marketplace with enemies closing in from all sides. One of her guards was wounded. The other was running out of ammunition. Through her bond with Jake, she could feel his progress. He was close to getting the broadcast working. She just needed to buy him more time. She stood up and shouted to the crowd. She told them she was Princess Zara, and she had proof that everything they believed about the Silver Mark was a lie. Some people in the crowd looked interested. Others looked hostile, but they stopped shooting long enough for her to keep talking. Jake got the broadcast system online. He uploaded all the evidence files and started transmitting. Every screen in the capital city suddenly showed the historical records he and Zara had discovered. Ancient images of Valorans bonding with other species. Genetic data showing the Silver Mark was advantageous. documents proving the conspiracy to hide the truth. The evidence spread through the city like wildfire. People stopped fighting to watch the broadcasts. They saw proof that their ancestors had welcomed cross-species bonding. They saw how the Pure Blood Council had systematically destroyed this history. They learned that Princess Zara was not cursed. She was genetically perfect for bonding with another species. The centuries-old superstition crumbled under the weight of undeniable facts. In the marketplace, the crowd's attitude shifted. People who had been ready to help capture Zara now looked ashamed. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd and told Zara that her grandmother had the silver mark and died alone because no one would bond with her. The woman had tears in her eyes as she apologized. Others came forward with similar stories. The silver mark had destroyed families for generations, and it was all based on lies. Draven watched the broadcast from his command center and felt everything falling apart. His soldiers were laying down their weapons. His political supporters were distancing themselves from him. The truth was spreading too fast to contain. He had one option left. If he could not control the Empire, he would kill the ones who had exposed him. He grabbed a weapon and headed for the communications tower. If he could kill the human, at least that would be some satisfaction. Jake was shutting down the broadcast equipment when he felt danger through his bond with Zara. She was warning him. Someone was coming. He turned, just as Draven burst through the door. The High Counselor fired his weapon without hesitation. Jake dove behind equipment and returned fire. They exchanged shots while circling the room. Draven was screaming about honor and tradition and purity. Jake did not waste breath responding. He just focused on surviving. Zara felt Jake in danger and ran toward the communications tower. Her guards tried to keep up, but she was faster. Driven by fear for her bonded mate, she arrived to find Jake and Draven fighting hand to hand. Jake's cybernetic arm had been damaged by an energy blast. He was holding his own, but barely. Draven aimed his weapon at Jake's head for a killing shot. Zara did not think. She just moved. She grabbed a piece of debris and threw it at Draven. The impact knocked his aim off, and the shot went wide. Draven spun toward her in fury. He raised his weapon to fire at Zara, but Jake was already moving. He tackled Draven, and they went down hard. The weapon skittered across the floor. Both men scrambled for it. Jake got there first. He pointed the weapon at Draven and his finger tensed on the trigger, but Jake did not fire. He could have killed Draven easily. The man had tried to murder both him and Zara multiple times, but Jake lowered the weapon. He told Draven it was over. The truth was out. The coup had failed. Killing him now would accomplish nothing. Draven stared at him with hatred and disbelief. He had been defeated by a human who would not even finish the job properly. Catherine arrived with palace guards who arrested Draven. The High Counselor would face trial for treason and conspiracy. The coup was over before it really began. Once the soldiers learned the truth about the Silver Mark, most of them abandoned Draven's cause. No one wanted to fight for a leader who had been lying to them for years. In the aftermath, Jake collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss. His cybernetic arm was destroyed, and he had taken several wounds during the fighting, but he was alive. Zara held him while medical teams arrived. Through their bond, she poured strength and love toward him. She told him he was an idiot for not staying safe. He told her she was an idiot for running into danger to save him. They both agreed they were perfect for each other. 6 months later, Zara stood in her laboratory working on a new research project. The revelation about the Silver Mark had transformed Valoran society. Cross-species bonding was now not only accepted but celebrated. Other species with compatible individuals were forming bonds, creating new partnerships that benefited everyone. Medical knowledge was being shared more freely. The barriers between species were coming down. Jake came into the lab wearing his new cybernetic arm. This one was better than the original. Built with both human and Valoran technology, he had accepted a position as permanent ambassador and military advisor to Valoria. Earth had been surprisingly supportive, recognizing the political advantages of having a human so closely tied to the Valoran royal family. Jake did not care about the politics. He cared about being with Zara. They walked together to the balcony, where Zara had once stood alone, and accepted her death. Now she stood with Jake, looking out at a city that had rejected her, but now celebrated what she represented. Change was possible. Prejudice could be overcome, and sometimes the most unlikely person could be exactly who you needed. Jake put his arm around her, and Zara leaned against him, feeling complete in a way she never thought possible. They had fought for the right to be together and won, and their victory had changed. An entire empire. Not bad for a cursed princess and a stubborn human who refused to accept that some things were impossible.